Start the weekend with Jeremy Vine.
Yeah! I love you, Reed.
Today, are you celebrating George Galloway's return to Westminster? Should we ban booze on flights? And is it time to ditch old-fashioned wedding traditions? With me, Jeremy Vine. Welcome to the show. It is the 1st of March. We got there. And happy St. David's Day. Everyone joined by the Conservative peer Saida Barty and the podcast host Gemma Forte. Great panel. Lovely to see you both. First up, are you glad to see George Galloway back in Westminster politics? He's just been elected as the new MP for Rochdale. Really big result for him. Despite being a divisive figure over the years, he reacted to the results saying, "This is for Gaza." So, are you celebrating this, or are you angry given his controversial past? Then is it time to ban booze on flights? Passengers on a flight from Edinburgh to Tenerife were forced to endure a flight from hell after a row between drunken yobs ended up escalating into a physical fight, apparently between two brothers. The group was said to have been drinking heavily since takeoff. Usual story. Let's just take alcohol off planes, shall we? Then should we ditch the old-fashioned wedding traditions? According to a survey, young people have fallen out of love with them. Almost half say that asking the woman's father for permission is old-fashioned. Almost 9 out of 10 young people say that men proposing to women is old hat. Give us a call, tell us what you think of that. And as for giving the bride away, then we look at some of the stories in the papers and online, and we are going to be joined later by the Strictly star Graziano Di Prima, who will tell us all about his upcoming tour. There he is. 11:15, the conversation continues with Dawn, who's standing in the storm. She's asking if we need a bigger royal family. At 12:45, it's Alexis, Conrad, and friends. We've got plenty to get through, of course. We want to hear from you. Let me show you how to get in touch with the help of Dick Dastardly here. There we go. So here's your number, 020-7862-2222, and it is 16p a minute when you call from a landline. But crucially, as Muttley will tell us, a mobile could be a little bit more in terms of pounds, a bit more expensive. Facebook, TikTok, Threads, Insta, X, formerly Twitter. You can find us on all of those social media platforms just by typing in Jeremy Vine on 5 when you're online. And if you go to YouTube and you type Jeremy Vine on 5, you will find our greatest hits. Now, speaking of greatest hits, this must be the greatest hit of George Galloway's career. My goodness. Rochdale by-election. And we're asking if you're glad to see Galloway back at Westminster. He's been elected as MP for Rochdale despite being a divisive figure over the years. So, what do you think of it, Saida? I woke up this morning, I was quite shocked, actually.
Yeah, I mean, I think lots of people were expecting George Galloway to win the Rochdale by-election once the Labour Party no longer had a candidate, and once...
Well, they were still on the ballot. I thought a lot of people might have missed the whole Labour thing and just vote Labour anyway. But
I think it was such a huge story, and I think because of the backdrop of what's going on in Gaza and the fact that, you know, as the polls were opening, there was this terrible attack on an aid distribution moment when hundreds of poor lost their lives. I just think against that backdrop, this was going to be a moment for people to say, as often is in by-elections, right, I'm just going to kind of, you have my say now. And by-elections are really unusual, right? Voter turnout is usually quite low. It's usually a moment for the electorate to say, you know, a plague on all your houses, and they do produce quite odd results.
Well, yes, I mean, this one particularly because of the backdrop, as you say. Labour's held Rochdale since 2010, and in the last general election won the seat with a majority of nearly 10,000. The by-election was called after the death of Rochdale's MP, Sir Tony Lloyd, who's very much old-school Labour. He died of leukemia on the 17th of January. 11 candidates stood, including Azza Ali, the candidate abandoned by Labour over anti-Semitic comments. Azza Ali has suggested Israel had deliberately relaxed security ahead of the 7th of October attack after warnings of an imminent threat. You just have a look then at the results. So you see the dominance of Mr. Galloway. A couple of things to point out as well here, actually. So George Galloway, Workers' Party, 12,300, that's nearly 40% of the vote. The guy in second place, David Tully, is just quite an interesting local character. He does a lot of fundraising. He's well-known business person, does a lot for charity, and he just went on Rochdale. And often you get candidates who don't even know which constituency they're in. So he did really, really well, 1 vote in 5. Then the Conservatives in third place, so they will be quite pleased with that. Labour, as Said is saying, Labour weren't behind their candidate, so this guy has been essentially vaporised. And then again, Ian Donaldson, Liberal Democrats. Who are we missing? We're missing Reform, who were supposed to be taking lumps out of the Conservatives. But obviously there aren't that many votes on the right to go around in that constituency. The big winner is George Galloway, and the big loser in his eyes, Keir Starmer.
Keir Starmer, this is for Gaza. And you will pay a high price for the role that you have played.
So, what do you think of that, Gemma? Keir Starmer, this is for Gaza.
Complicated, isn't it? I think George Galloway is knows what he's doing, and he's quite a divisive figure. At the same time, though, he will be speaking for, many, many people in terms of looking at the situation in Gaza and feeling incredible disquiet about Starmer's stance, i.e. just sort of seems to be unqualified support for Israel to an extent. I know recently they have been talking about a ceasefire, but it's been a bit pathetic. But that said, there's so many other things as well, like, for instance, the fact that Reform barely registered. I think it's really interesting when you look at that independent candidate, what he achieved on his own. Reform have been never off the telly, millions of pounds behind them. So that's an interesting thing. I think that now, in the age of social media, George Galloway's never been an MP, and I think all his but in the age of social media.
Oh, I see, yeah.
So I think that because of the kind of character he is,
Right.
all his clips now are going to be, they will be providing a thorn in the side of Starmer that will be quite interesting.
But he's a single issue guy in a way, and it's all Middle East. And the question is, if you're in Rochdale, whether at some point you think, I'm wanting to talk about the holes in the road here.
Yeah.
He's not really a local candidate.
No, and listen, he's not going to stand again, and we don't know when the next election. No, he's actually said he's going to stand once in Rochdale, which is what he normally usually does in every other constituency. Kind of, the George Galloway train rolls in and then rolls back out again. I think people accept he's not going to deliver anything for Rochdale in the way that we saw in other constituencies that he won in. And if it means that for, whether it's the next 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, 5 months, whenever the election is going to come, if he continuously raises this issue of Gaza, that might be the only positive. The worry I have is, at a time when politics is really divisive, when politicians are increasingly using language which pits community against community and is really quite incendiary, and we've just had a whole week of my colleagues from Lee Anderson to Liz Truss to Paul Scully to any other person that seems to come out and speak. I can't even bring myself to I even joke on it. But, there's something about this terribleness of the language that's coming out of mine. Do we really need another politician
I don't know whether we can show that.
going to use that kind of
I wanted to hear what you thought about the Lee Anderson. Now, I know we got the Lee Anderson clip, because this is what caused all the trouble for him, although he may be reveling in it. And this is where he says that he thinks the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, has been taken over by Islamists.
We've got a very cowardly Khan running London. He seems to be letting not only the Jewish population down, but the whole population of London and Britain as a whole. I heard the comments earlier you would make about Suella, some of the comments she made earlier this week, and I don't actually believe that the Islamists have got control of our country, but what I do believe is they've got control of Khan, and they've got control of London, and they've got control of Storm as well.
What do you think of that?
I mean, that is just such terrible stereotyping and tropes. I mean, the Muslim takeover, the Jewish takeover, these are all the similar forms of racism. And one of the things I really despise is the way, and this is what I really despise, is the way in which politics is pitting communities against community, and particularly the Jewish community and the Muslim community. And it's actually one of the reasons why, actually only this week, David Baddiel and I have decided to say, stop talking about us, stop telling us what we think and what our communities think. We are going to speak for ourselves. We're going to have these tough conversations.
You've got this podcast, right?
We've got this podcast called A Muslim and a Jew Go There, which is all about going there and having the really difficult conversations that most people are saying, well, avoid that, or politicians are ratcheting it up for their own political ends. And I think it's really important for us to have very frank, honest conversations in which we disagree.
No, understood, but you may
create a safe space
sure,
to
but you
have
may
it.
both be quite liberal, and it's when you get people on the extremes talking that it gets. Because I'm just trying to imagine, Gemma, Lee Anderson in a room with George Galloway. Can you? I think it would. Would it get political?
I agree. Everything needs to be ratcheted down at the moment, and it's, we're living in a horrible, horrible time. Where is the leadership? And presiding over all of this is Sunak. Wildman got away with the piece that actually she wrote in the Telegraph, which kicked off Lee Anderson's foul comment that sort of stemmed from her, and he doesn't contain anything, and he doesn't manage anything.
She's been fired already, so when you do like Liz Truss would, you can't do much short of deselecting her.
I also feel like Rochdale haven't been served very well. If you look at all the candidates, like, Labour's disaster, that was a mistake. So they essentially didn't have a Labour choice.
Do you think so? Because I'm going conspiracy theory on it. I think it's very convenient for Labour not to be in that election, because otherwise, what Starmer doesn't want is Starmer's party versus Galloway. So I almost wonder whether they were looking for an excuse to pull their guy.
Well, look, you could say that, but also what Azhar Ali said meant that there was no way that you were going to be able to let him stand as a Labour candidate. That was an obvious anti-Semitic trope. However, I don't think that him losing the Labour whip during the election was bad for Starmer, because I think even if he had stood as a Labour candidate, Galloway would have
lost.
They're rooting out anti-Semitism, but you've got to root out Islamophobia as well.
After the break, we'll keep talking about this. Are you celebrating George Galloway's victory? What do you think when you saw it, you heard about it? Give us a call now, 0207 862 2222. We'll be back with you in a moment.
Okay, bye.